So in reality, as I said, it's really a pleasure to have to be here, because from what I can gather from the program, we are meeting to share good practices and strengthening ways on how to push further the youth work agenda. So whilst I was preparing for this, I thought of a campfire first. I mean, and why a campfire? The time when everyone is gathered together to sing and tell stories in front of the dancing flames. The fire, which I'm sure we all think of when we were young people, when we think of youth work. I mean, because it's a fire really which gathers us together to tell stories in front of these dancing flames. And at one moment in time, everybody sleeps together as the fire dies and starts dreaming. And dreams different stories. And in reality today, this is what I want to share, my story into how I was involved in these past 30 years to make a dream come true. And my dream come true was the right to youth work, which really went beyond myself. We all believe that young people have a right to youth work. So this is what I will do today. I will give you an impression of what has happened in Malta, which, to be honest, when I look at your youth work repertoire, I realize that we all sailed to the same kind of journey, except from what I could gather, and at least I might not be right. What I'm gonna talk about, what I am sharing today is the Maltese context, is that there is one thing which is not happening as much as here in Scotland, and it's the professionalization of youth work. So I start with a minute of silence to pay respects to the gods of commitment, passion, tenacity, and intuition. I cannot really make you look at these words for 1 minute. I know that these are the values which we all have used all along the way and will continue using in our lobbying moments. So youth work in Malta was only in the voluntary sector and mostly done by the Catholic Church in the past. No priority given to it by government, no training to those involved in the field, no policies attached to it. In 1993, the first national youth policy was published, which brought about the setting of an Institute of Youth Studies, now a department in the Faculty of Social Wellbeing. And this department now offers formal degrees to education of youth workers, besides focusing on research on youth work. It was in 1998 when an association for youth workers was formed to lobby government to the right to youth work and the rights for youth workers to be recognized as other professions and become at par with regards to salary, employment conditions, and continuous professional development, similar to other professions, that is, those of teachers, social workers, etc. In the meantime, youth policies continued being published and increased the commitments to work for government. One legal notice that was issued was to issue and set up Aġenzija Żgħażagħ, I mean the agency that I'm leading now, and its aim is to implement the youth policy and strengthen youth work in Malta, support the voluntary sector, which is also doing youth work in its organizations and other public entities who work with young people. Following that was the Youth Work Profession Act in 2014. The Act gave professional status to youth workers. It made them at par in the eyes of government with other professionals. It states that those working with young people can call themselves youth workers only if they have a degree or equivalent qualification in youth work. And because of this, youth workers are given a warrant after 2 years in employment and in practice, become part of a register of youth workers, which is followed by a board called the Youth Workers Profession Board, and which means that they enjoy all employment benefits as professionals, but also scrutinized on the way they work with young people and on their continuous professional training. In reality, this might scare many people in some ways, but it was something which the Association of Youth Workers lobbied for and wanted for its members. And let us remember that the notion of rights is very powerful. And we always believed as members, I was the president of the association at that time, as members of the association, that to vindicate a right, it needs to be embodied in a legalized structure. Professionalization is stringent and sets structure, but does not leave youth workers at the periphery. It puts them with the mainstream. The big issue is that much of youth work rails against institutionalization, it rails against legislation, and it rails against professionalization. Many of us believe in the field, believe in improvisation because it's empowering as it welcomes the unknown. And we always think that that should be always our tool in youth work. But we believed that in reality, if we want a kaleidoscope of youth work to continue flourishing without anyone putting his hand under it to stop it, we had to get the recognition of youth work as a profession. Nowhere in youth work has this been done yet. At the moment, Malta is striving to get it registered at EU level, which is proving to be successful. I mean, I think when I was preparing for this, it's also important to know that the European Union has got a new youth strategy 2019 and 2027 to 2027, and the Council of Europe has got a youth strategy until 2030, and they both prioritize youth work. And as a result of this, last year there was a big European youth work convention, which in a way put forward a process to start off a European youth work agenda to continue really putting youth work at the top and putting funding to youth work, because these two strategies are prioritizing youth work. I hope, and why am I saying this? Because in reality, the issues surfacing post-pandemic are not on how to deal with the virus, COVID-19 anymore, but where to put the money dedicated to the recovery plan. And unless we are in the mainstream, the money dedicated to the recovery plan would never come to us. When we were looking at the Mentimeter, most of you really put funding as something which is important. And it is true that funding is the most important thing, and this is why I have put up this slide over here. But to get funding, we have to think of other ways on how to cut funding. And this is why I am emphasizing that the Maltese story has also always emphasized the legislation of youth work, but the legislation as a profession. I hope I was some sort of an inspiration to you. I think let us all remember that mountains, after all, can be moved, even though sometimes, especially at this moment in time, after a pandemic, or as I might say, during a pandemic, because the pandemic is not yet over, sometimes we feel bad and we feel that we really can't continue moving forward. One thing that definitely I believe that we all need to do is really joining forces. I have been involved in the European field for years, and I think this is the moment when at a European level, we are really, all the policy documents are really giving a priority to youth work. So really now it is time to continue pushing forward, to continue legislating this rather than leaving it only in the form of policy. I stop here. Thank you for having me.